the story of the Bill of Rights.
Hello. I hear that you want to learn all about the history of equal rights. Well, you've come to the right person. I'm Susan B. Anthony, and I spent all my life working for women's rights. Equal rights. What does that mean? Well, it means that all people, whether they are rich or poor, male or female, fat or thin, tall or short, just everyone should be allowed to do the same as everyone else. That's only fair, isn't it? In our Constitution, there is a section called the Bill of Rights. In the Bill of Rights, it is clearly written down exactly what some of those rights are. This bill is very important because it explains just what many of our rights as individuals are. It says when and where the government may interfere.
After the Constitution was written, everyone agreed it was a very important document. It explained the rules for running the country. But many of the state's leaders felt that the Constitution did not do enough. They were afraid that greedy rulers might one day try to control the people, just like the King of England had. Kings had the power to put people in jail just for saying things the king didn't like. The state leaders wanted to make sure that nothing like this ever happened in America. So some of them threatened to vote against the Constitution if changes weren't made to protect the people. James Madison agreed with them, but he convinced everyone to vote for the Constitution anyway. He reminded them of the Constitution's promise that changes or amendments could be made if enough people voted for those changes. The Constitution became law in the summer of 1788, but many people continued to worry about the power of the government. Within a year, Madison and his friends in Congress came up with a list of 12 ideas that they wanted to add to the Constitution. 10 of these, which we call the Bill of Rights, were approved by the states. The First Amendment is probably the most important. It protects some of our most important human rights: freedom to believe what we want, say what we want, and write what we want. The Second Amendment says citizens can form armed militias to protect themselves. Today, some people think guns are dangerous and that there are too many of them in our country. But others believe strongly in this constitutional right. The Third Amendment says the Army can't take over our houses. And the Fourth says police can't search a house or a person without a good reason and permission from a judge. The Fifth, Sixth, Seventh, and Eighth Amendments protect the rights of people accused of crimes. These rules say, among other things, that a person can't be punished until they are proven guilty of a crime, and that 12 ordinary people should decide whether the defendant is guilty or innocent. The Eighth Amendment forbids punishment that is too mean. The Ninth Amendment says that people can come up with even more human rights to add to the Constitution if they want to. The 10th Amendment says the government can only have the powers listed in the Constitution and that it can't have any more power without permission from the people. The Bill of Rights is one of the most important documents ever written. It promises all of us equal and fair protection under the law. Let's review what we've learned. The Bill of Rights was written over 200 years ago because people were afraid the government had too much power. The Bill of Rights protects our human rights. James Madison helped get the Bill of Rights into the Constitution. Changes to the Constitution are called amendments. Can you name some of the rights and freedoms you have that some kids might not? Quakers and abolitionists.
Many people throughout history have turned to the Bill of Rights to see whether they should be allowed to do something or not. I used the bill and the rest of the Constitution to support my argument that women should be allowed to vote. And there are plenty of other examples of times when people have used the bill to argue for what they thought was right.
One group that used the Bill of Rights to say what they thought was right was the Quakers. Their religion said that war was wrong and that Quakers should not fight, even to defend their own country. Some Americans believed that everyone should fight for their country, but the Bill of Rights said that the government could not make people do things that their religion said were wrong. President Abraham Lincoln agreed with the Quakers and said that they did not have to fight in the Civil War. But the Quakers proved that there were other ways to fight for their country without using violence. In the Civil War, soldiers from the southern states fought against soldiers from the north. The South was angry because the government told them that they were not allowed to bring slaves with them as they settled the new land in the West. The South argued that slaves were not protected by the Bill of Rights and that the government shouldn't tell the southern states what to do. Many Americans in the North, like William Lloyd Garrison, Frederick Douglass, and Harriet Tubman, wanted to end slavery. They were called abolitionists, and they thought that the Bill of Rights should protect everyone. Douglass and Tubman knew all about slavery. They had been slaves themselves and had seen how hard and unfair it was. Both had escaped, but promised they would do everything they could to help free others still in slavery. Frederick Douglass wrote speeches, and Harriet Tubman risked her own life to go back many times and sneak slaves out along secret paths and hiding places called the Underground Railroad. The Quakers and others helped Harriet along the way, giving food and shelter to her passengers. Most Quakers were abolitionists. They got lots of people together to say that they didn't like slavery. They printed newspapers saying slavery was wrong. The North won the Civil War, and slavery eventually ended when the 13th Amendment was ratified on December 6, 1865. The fight to stop slavery took a long time, but the Quakers and other abolitionists could be proud of what they had done to prove that the Bill of Rights protected all Americans, no matter what their religion was or the color of their skin. What did we learn in this segment? The Quakers believed that war and violence were wrong. Some people thought the Quakers were not patriotic. People who wanted to end slavery were called abolitionists. The Civil War was fought between the North and the South. The South didn't want the United States government telling them what to do. Pretend you are an abolitionist. What would you do to help end slavery? Abraham Lincoln.
87 years ago, our fathers brought forth... No, that's not right. How about this? 87 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this, but in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note or long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. Tomorrow, I'll give this address at Gettysburg, on a battlefield where thousands of Confederate and Union soldiers died in this awful Civil War. Both sides fighting for a country they believed to be the true United States. Oh, if there were only some way to heal the wounds of this country and make it whole again.
Those words are from President Abraham Lincoln's most famous speech. He wrote them on a train on his way to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. There, he would try to explain to people that keeping America together was the most important thing that anyone could ever fight for. His speech is called the Gettysburg Address. Abe Lincoln was born in a log cabin in Kentucky in 1809. His father was a frontier farmer, which meant that Abe's family moved around a lot looking for good land to grow food. There weren't many teachers on the frontier, so Abe didn't go to school much, but he taught himself how to write, and he read all the books he could find. When Abe was 21 years old, his family moved to another state, Illinois. He had grown tall and strong and found work in a country store and on a flatboat. When he wasn't working, Abe studied law books and became a lawyer. Abe was always interested in his country. He was against slavery and worried that the big plantations in the South would never free their slaves because then they would have to pay someone to do the work. Abraham Lincoln decided to try to get people to vote for him to be a senator, someone who represents their state in the country's capital, Washington, D.C. Another person in the contest was a man named Stephen Douglas. He and Lincoln had a series of famous debates. A debate is a public argument about an idea. Abe Lincoln and Stephen Douglas disagreed about the idea of slavery. Although Abe lost the election to Douglas, the Lincoln-Douglas debates made him famous. 2 years later, he was elected President of the United States. But many people in the southern part of the country voted against Abe because they thought he would try to end slavery. In fact, most of the states in the South had already voted to leave the United States and start their own country. This made people in the North very angry. Soon after Abe became president and moved into the White House, the Civil War started. As president, Abe knew that it was his job to try and keep the country together. The Civil War made him very sad. People often saw him working alone, thinking very hard about how to bring peace back to the country. Lincoln made a decision. "The moment came," he said, "when I felt that slavery must die, that the nation might live." In September of 1862, Abe issued the Emancipation Proclamation. It was the important first step in freeing the slaves. The North finally won the war, and President Lincoln was elected to a second term. But just 5 days after the war ended, a man shot Abraham Lincoln with a gun and killed him. Most Americans were very sorry to lose such a fine leader. They made plans to build a memorial in his honor. Today, the Lincoln Memorial looks proudly over the city of Washington, D.C. Lincoln's picture is on our $5 bill and on our penny to remind us of the man that kept our country together. Let's review Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas had a series of famous debates about the idea of slavery. Abraham Lincoln became the 16th President of the United States just before the Civil War. Lincoln's most famous speech is the Gettysburg Address. His Emancipation Proclamation helped secure freedom from slavery. What do you think he meant when he said, "Slavery must die that the nation might live"? The Emancipation Proclamation.
I remember the plantation. The master and his family lived in the big house, while me and my brothers, sisters, and 16 other families of slaves were crammed together in the cabins. I slept right on the cold, damp floor. Oh, I still found ways to have fun. I even played with the master's kids. But when I was 7, I was put to work, hauling wood, fetching meat from the smokehouse, and peeling vegetables for Auntie in the kitchen. When I turned 9, I went to work in the fields picking cotton. We started before the rooster crowed and didn't stop till dark. You wouldn't think the white folk needed so much cotton. Year in, year out, the only rest came on Sunday. That's the day I'd go off to the next plantation and play ball. Black boys and white boys playing together. Sometimes we forgot about what color we were altogether. The woods at night was a special place for us. That's where we said our prayers and made music. Old folks would play the fiddle or pick the banjo, and everybody would dance and sing. We sure had fun. One day, a new slave called Smithy arrived. He told us stories about life in Africa and how slavers came to take people away from their homes. He told me about Harriet Tubman, a runaway slave who bravely kept coming back to take others to freedom. Then Smithy told us about President Abraham Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation. It meant we could be free if the North ever won the Civil War. Freedom. That night, I dreamed about how an angel touched the chains of bondage and broke them forever. But one day, the miracle did happen. The Master came and told us all. The war was over, and we were free. The Emancipation Proclamation made it so. We children danced for joy. Some of the grown-ups even cried as they listened to the words on the paper.
Susan B. Anthony.
Oh, hello. I was just reading this letter that I wrote to my friend right after I placed my first vote. I got arrested for doing it because it was illegal. But I believed so strongly that women should be allowed to vote and, well, perhaps we should start at the beginning.
When Susan B. Anthony was a young child, she began to notice that boys and girls were treated differently. In school, when she wanted to learn about math, her teacher told her not to bother. Girls didn't need to know about math. When her father had to sell their home to pay money that he owed, Susan watched him take all her mother's things too. They belonged to him because the law said women couldn't own anything. And when Susan became a teacher, she found out that male teachers were paid $10 a week, while women made only $2.50 a week. It seemed that everywhere Susan looked, women were treated unfairly. Their ideas didn't count, and their hard work was ignored. They weren't even allowed to vote. She decided to do something about it. As a Quaker, Susan believed she had a moral obligation or responsibility to people that were treated unfairly. Together with her friend, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony started the National Women's Suffrage Movement. Suffrage means getting the right to vote. When the next election came up, Susan walked right up to the ballot box and put in her vote, even though it was against the law. 2 weeks later, the police came to put her in jail.
When the officer came to my house, he told me that I was under arrest and should accompany him to the station. I swiftly informed him that if he really wanted me to go, he would have to handcuff me. I went with him. On the streetcar that we took, the conductor asked me for my fare. I was not going to pay my own car fare for a trip that I was being made to take. I am traveling at the expense of the government, I told the conductor. Ask the officer to pay my fare. Then I told all the passengers why I was being arrested. They could hardly believe it. The day that I had to go to court, I caused a commotion too, especially when I gave my speech. I said it was we, the people, not we, the white male citizens, nor yet we, the male citizens who formed this union. And then I went on to say that every discrimination in the Constitution is today null and void.
Susan went to court, but didn't win the right to vote. She was determined to keep trying. She spent the rest of her life traveling all across America, making speeches and writing letters, trying to convince people to change the Constitution so that women could vote. Even though it was not in Susan B. Anthony's lifetime, the 19th Amendment was finally added to the Constitution. It said, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied on account of sex." In honor of the brave woman who worked her whole life for the rights of others, it was called the Susan B. Anthony Amendment.
So they named the amendment after me, and at last women had the right to vote. And my last words ever spoken in public became true. Failure is impossible.
Let's review. The right to vote is called suffrage. Susan B. Anthony believed she had a moral obligation to help others, especially women. The 19th Amendment to the Constitution gives women the right to vote and is called the Susan B. Anthony Amendment. Ask a mother or a grandmother how their rights have changed since they were little girls.